In this video, we're going to learn about adding signed numbers. In elementary school, you worked on adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing rational numbers that were not negative. Today, we will begin looking at including negative numbers in these operations, starting with addition. In order to add signed numbers, we need to begin to think about the idea of opposites. All right, and in the box, we define what opposites are. Opposites are two numbers that are the same distance from zero. Opposites will always add to zero and are called a zero-sum pair. Okay, so in example number 1, we want to write the answer to each addition problem below. All right, in letter A, -8 plus 8. Okay, these numbers are opposites because they're the same distance from zero. -8 is 8 units to the left of zero, 8 is 8 to the units to the right of zero, and if you add opposites, you will get 0. 1/4 plus -1/4 is also 0 because 1/4 and -1/4 are the same distance from 0. They're opposites. -15 is 0. -215 is 215 to the left of 0, while 215 is 215 units to the right of 0. Each pair of numbers above are opposites because their numbers are the same distance from 0. These pairs of numbers have a zero-sum pair, have a sum of 0, and opposites are also called additive inverses. If we remember the inverse property of addition, we said that any number added to its opposite would equal 0. Negative numbers are used to represent having less than 0 of something, while positive numbers represent having more than 0 of something. In our next couple of examples, we're going to practice adding numbers that have the same sign. Okay, in example number 2, Samuel's bank account balance is $0. He then withdraws $15 for dinner and also withdraws $10 for a movie ticket. What is Samuel's balance after the two withdrawals? Okay, when you withdraw money from your bank account, that means that you're taking money out of your account, so the amount that you have will decrease. Withdrawals will be represented by negative numbers, while deposits, which is when you put money into your account, will be represented with positive numbers since your amount will increase. Okay, so Samuel had a bank account balance of $0. He then withdrew $15 for dinner and then withdrew $10 for a movie ticket. To represent withdrawing $15, that's going to be the number -15. And to represent withdrawing $10 for the movie ticket, that's going to be the number -10. To figure out Samuel's balance after these two withdrawals, we're going to add these two numbers together, -15 plus -10. Okay, and if we think about how that works, okay, well, if I withdrew $15 and then withdrew 10 more dollars, I've withdrawn a total of $25, which would mean I've taken out $25. So the answer here must be -25. This example shows how you add two negative numbers. If you combine negative numbers together, all you do is add how many negatives that you have. Here we have 15 negatives. Here we have 10 more negatives. That's a total of 25 negatives altogether. Okay, so just like when you're working with positive numbers, two positive numbers added together is a positive number. Two negative numbers added together is a negative number. How many negatives in total did you have? So let's try that here in example 3. Write the answer to each addition problem below. -3 plus -6. Two negatives, I'm going to add them together. That gives me a total of 9 negatives, so -9 would be the sum. In letter B, we have fractions, -3/8 plus -9/4. Both numbers are negative, so I'm going to add them together. And if you recall from elementary school, in order to add fractions together, you need to have a common denominator. Here we have a denominator of 8. Here we have a denominator of 4. Eighths and fourths, we could use a common denominator of 8, which means I'm going to keep -3/8 the same, but I'm going to change -9/4 into a denominator of 8. Well, 4 times 2 is 8, so I'm going to have to do the same thing to the numerator. 9 times 2 is 18. Okay, so here, -3/8 plus -18/8 means that we have a total of -21/8. All right, and that would be the answer to our addition problem. You could change that into a mixed number if you wanted to. Remember, it would still be negative. 8 goes into 21 twice with 5/8 left over. So you could also say that this is -2 and 5/8. Okay, and then in letter C, we have two decimals that we're going to add together. Both of them are negative, -10 and 5/10 plus -2 and 25/100. Remember that when you're adding decimals that you need to line up the decimal places. Okay, so since both of these numbers are negative, I'm going to add them together. I'm going to have -10 and 5/10, and then I'm going to have -2 and 25/100. Make sure that you line up your decimal places so that you can add your tenths with your tenths, your ones with your ones, your hundredths with your hundredths. There is no number here, so we'll just make that a 0. Okay, and again, since these were the same sign, all we're going to do is just add them together. 0 plus 5 is 5. 5 plus 2 is 7. Bring down your decimal point. 0 plus 2 is 2. 1 plus 0 is 1. And the answer needs to be negative. Since both of the numbers were negative, we get -12 and 75/100. Now that we're comfortable adding two positive numbers together and two negative numbers together, we need to start to think about, well, what happens if I have a positive number and a negative number and I'm going to add them together? All right, well, if they're opposites, we know that the sum is going to be equal to 0. But what happens if you add a positive number and a negative number that are not opposites? All right, in examples like this, knowing the number's absolute value will help us find the sum. And to recall from previous discussions, absolute value represents a number's distance from 0. Okay, we put a number inside of these bars to represent absolute value. So this means the absolute value of -3. And what I'm asking here is how far is -3 from 0 on the number line? The absolute value of -3 is 3, since it's 3 units to the left of 0 on the number line. In example number 4, find the absolute value of each number below. What's the absolute value of -13? Well, -13 is 13 units to the left of 0, so its distance is 13 units from 0. Letter B, what's the absolute value of 9? Well, 9 is 9 units to the right of 0, so its distance is 9 units from 0. Letter C, what's the absolute value of -8 and 25/100? Well, that would be 8 and 25/100 units to the left of 0, so its distance, its absolute value from 0 is 8 and 25/100. Now that we've refreshed our memory with absolute value, let's practice adding a positive and a negative that are not opposites together. In example 5, 7 plus -4 is the problem that we need to do. To help us find the sum, we're going to use a diagram. The following symbols will be used in that diagram. All right. A positive symbol will equal +1, while a negative symbol will equal -1. Together, a positive symbol and a negative symbol will form a zero-sum pair, since 1 plus -1 is equal to 0. This will help us to add our numbers together. All right, so if you look at this diagram down here, I have 7 positives to represent 7. I have 4 negatives to represent -4. What we can do is cross out all zero-sum pairs so that we can determine what the answer would be. So if I have a +1 with a -1, that equals 0. Another positive with a negative equals 0. Another positive with a negative equals 0. And a final positive with a negative equals 0. That leaves us with 3 positives. All right, so 7 plus -4 is equal to 3. When signs are different, the sum actually relates to a subtraction problem. This sum is the same as what subtraction problem? Well, 7 plus -4 is the same as the subtraction problem of 7 minus 4. In each example, we would get the value of 3. Okay, and in part C, it's asking us, well, looking at this problem, 7 plus -4, Why does the answer have to be positive and not negative? The answer up here, when we had a positive 7 plus a negative 4, was a positive 3. Why wasn't it negative 3? Well, in order to help us determine what the sign of the answer should be, we need to look at the number's absolute values. The absolute value of 7 is 7, since 7 is 7 to the right of 0. The absolute value of negative 4 is 4, since it's 4 to the left of 0. Okay? The sign of your sum will be the sign of the number that has the greater absolute value, which in this case was the positive 7. So we can say that the answer will be positive because the positive number has a greater absolute value. All right, and that's the big takeaway here today. When your numbers have different signs, but they're not opposites, it's going to relate to a subtraction problem. Okay, and in fact, what we did over here, we took the absolute value of our two numbers and just subtracted them. All right, and then the sign of your answer has to be the sign of the number with the greater absolute value. So keeping that in mind, if I look at this example, negative 66 plus 42, will the sum be positive or will it be negative, and how do you know? All right, well, if we think about the two numbers here, the absolute value of negative 66 is 66. The absolute value of 42 is 42. My sign has to be negative in this example, since the negative number has the bigger absolute value. So I can say that the sum is negative because the negative number has a greater absolute value. It has a greater absolute value. All right. And now, well, let's see if we can think about what the sum actually would be. All right. So we have negative 66 plus 42. All right. I know it's going to be a negative number since the negative number has a bigger absolute value. And then if I were to actually subtract these numbers here, 6 minus 2 would be a 4. And 6 minus 4 would be a 2. So the sum to negative 66 plus 42 would be negative 24. Let's practice adding numbers that have different signs, all right? Find the sum of each problem below. Okay, now before I actually figure out what the sum is going to be, I'm going to first start with the sign in each example. Okay, when you add a positive number and a negative number together, the sign of your answer is with the sign of the number with the bigger absolute value. In letter A, 29 plus negative 28. Which number has the bigger absolute value? Which number is further from 0? Well, that would be the positive 29. So I know that my answer here is going to be a positive number. All right, in letter B, negative 21 plus 9. Again, what is the sign of the number going to be? The sign of the answer. Well, which number is further from 0? Which one has a bigger absolute value? Well, that would be the negative 21, since negative 21 is 21 to the left of 0, while 9 is 9 to the right of 0. So the answer here is going to be a negative number. And then in letter C, 350 plus negative 400, which number has the bigger absolute value? Well, that would be negative 400. So the answer to this sum will also be a negative number. Then remember, what you're really doing to come up with your sum here is you're subtracting the absolute values because the signs have different numbers. All right, 29 plus negative 28 is the same as 29 minus 28. So the answer here is going to be a positive 1. 29 plus negative 28 is positive 1. In example B, negative 21 plus 9 equals negative something. Well, let's subtract their absolute values. 21 minus 9 is equal to 12. So the answer here, negative 21 plus 9, is negative 12. And in example C, 350 plus negative 400 would have to be negative 50. All right, since 400 minus 350 is 50 when we subtract the absolute values. So again, when the signs of the two numbers are different in your addition problem, you're going to keep the sign of the number with the bigger absolute value in your answer, and then you're going to subtract the absolute values. And that is pretty much summarized right here in our main idea. These are the rules for adding any two rational numbers. If both numbers have the same sign, so they're both positive or they're both negative, you're going to keep that sign and you're going to add the absolute values of the numbers. But if the numbers have different signs, one of them is positive, one of them is positive, and one is negative, you're going to keep the sign of the number with the greater absolute value, and then you will subtract the absolute value of the numbers.